Hey guys, I hope you enjoy this week's sermon. If you're interested in getting connected here more at the sanctuary, you can visit us at our website at tscwest.org, or you can check us out on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all of the things. I hope you enjoy this message.
You, Jesus, are the Word, and the Word is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. So would you guide us on this path this morning? In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit we pray. Amen. You know, all throughout the Holy Text, we see Jesus inviting people to follow him. I think of the fishermen in Matthew 4. Jesus says, "Come and follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." They dropped their nets, they followed Jesus. In fact, the text says like this: immediately they left their nets and followed. Or think of the passage about the rich young ruler. A wealthy man came to Jesus and asked, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" He says, "Sell everything, give it to the poor. You'll have treasure in heaven, then come, follow me." There's myriads of texts like this all throughout the book. And you see, what I find so interesting every time Jesus asks someone to follow him is it doesn't really have this prerequisite. In fact, it doesn't have a prerequisite of belief. It has much more to do with what they start doing with their lives. It was a lifestyle change that Christ was inviting them into. You see, Jesus, I don't believe, often was asking for a belief change right out of the gate. I think belief changes over time, but really he was saying, "Come follow me, come follow what I do." You see, in Jesus' time, rabbis, they had disciples, and Jesus was a rabbi. They had disciples, and the disciples, they wouldn't just go to class, or they wouldn't just listen to the podcast of their teacher. They would follow them. They would live with and or around them. They would do what they did. They would dress how they dressed. It'd be easy to be my disciple. You just got to wear black. It'd be very easy. You wouldn't have to do much. There was this phrase that they would use back in these days. They would say, "May you be covered in the dust of your rabbi," which meant they would walk so close to their rabbi, behind him, that the dust from the rabbi's sandals would coat your body. Let's consider for a second, in kind of our Western way of viewing spirituality, how much of a priority we put and how much time we spend learning and studying, getting really smart in our brains, in comparison to how much effort and time we spend implementing, practicing, and following. I want you to know I am wildly guilty of this in my life. I can remember 8 or 9 years ago when my family and I, when we started practicing Sabbath, I probably read 8 to 10 books about Sabbath before I actually tried to do it. But you want to know when I learned the most about practicing Sabbath? By doing it. By actually doing it. By trying to follow the example. Rather than trying to learn about it, I just started trying to do it. And this is when I really began to understand what made Sabbath so powerful, is when I did it. I think, for example, this is why the 12 steps work so well if you actually work them, right? You don't just have to learn about making amends. You know what you have to go actually do? Make them. You got to go do it. But the transformation most often happens when people actually do it. When they go out and they make amends. You know, you can't just think about being of service. You actually have to go be of service. This is what actually makes them work. It's a lifestyle change. That's what makes the 12 steps so great, is it's not just learning about sobriety. It says this is how your lifestyle in its totality changes. Notice Jesus didn't say, "Do you want to be fishers of men? Go to the temple, read the Torah, come back to me when you have it all memorized, when you have perfect doctrine, when you can send nasty emails to all the pastors you don't like, to people on the internet, when you have the best theology and can tell everybody that they're wrong, then the work of God can be done in your life. That's not what he said. You know what he said? You want to be fishers of men? Follow me, baby. Just follow me, baby. Come get close. Let the dust from my sandals wash up on you. Do what I do. Say what I say. Pay attention to what I paid attention to. Don't pay attention to what I didn't pay attention to. Just follow me, baby. It's significantly more simple. It's significantly more accessible. You know, we tend to think that much of our Christian spirituality is about inviting Jesus into our life. But you know what Jesus does over and over and over? He invites us into his. He invites us into his life. Follow me. Follow my life. Jesus invites us into his. This is what he says right in the text. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. What he's saying when he says the way, in fact, you guys want to know something cool? The way is what the Christians, way early on, that's what they used to call themselves. They used to identify themselves based on the lifestyle they lived. We are the way. I'm starting to sing the Mandalorian theme song in my head. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, which is to say, come follow me. Come follow my lifestyle. Do what I do, and you will find the Father's life. But notice what comes first. The way. When talking about this passage, you've heard me quote this a lot, and you will as long as you come to this church. Eugene Peterson says this: we cannot suppress the Jesus way in order to sell the Jesus truth. The Jesus way and the Jesus truth must be congruent. Yes. Only when the Jesus way is organically joined with the Jesus truth do we get the Jesus life. The Jesus way wedded to the truth brings about the Jesus life. But Jesus as the truth gets far more attention than Jesus as the way. Jesus as the way is the most frequently evaded metaphor among the Christians with whom I have worked for 50 years as a North American pastor. John Mark Comer, in his book, Practicing the Way, he says it like this. He says, discipleship is not just about knowing what Jesus said, it's about imitating how he lived. What does this mean? Well, it means in order for us to follow the Jesus way, it's vital we don't exclusively pay attention and obsess over what he says. Yes, we take very seriously what he said, okay? But equally as serious, we pay attention to what he did and didn't do. Why? Because in order to follow how he lived, we have to pay attention to how he lived. That was my daughter's laugh. I knew that one a mile away. So we pay attention when we read the scriptures. It's so important to read it. But we also have to just pay attention to how he's living. You can read between the lines a little bit. Okay, interesting. How did he move through the world? How did he interact with people? It's going to be hard to preach, man, if she keeps, but stay, please stay. I love this. Oh. We pay attention to how he interacted with people. And then we ask ourselves this. We pay attention to how Jesus lived, and then we ask ourselves, how can I apply this lifestyle, this way Jesus lived, into my own context? How do I apply this into the way in which I am living my modern life? Which brings us to John chapter 11, which is my passage for this week as we're continuing to work through the passage of John. John chapter 11 is a gorgeous case study, I believe, when it pertains to the lifestyle of Jesus. And this chapter is incredibly dense. Not with Jesus simply teaching us about God, but Jesus is simply showing us how he moves, how he lives, how he has his being in the world. So this passage, I believe, especially chapter 11, is not simply for us to memorize the stories and know exactly what happened in the stories. They are an example that can show us how to move and live and have our being in the footsteps of our Rabbi, Jesus Christ. Now, I want you to know I cannot point out everything in our short amount of time here. So I'm going to leave parts of the story out. There's many things we can pay attention to. I had a big old list, and I prayed, and I said, okay, God, which ones are for us today? And I decided this morning which ones. So just know we're going to skip some stuff we're going to go through, but I really want to pay attention and for you guys to say, how did Jesus live? And then how can this impact how I live? Does that make sense? We're on the same page, the Jesus way? All right, let's go. We're going to start in chapter 11, verses 1 through 6. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory so that the Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus, he loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Now, if you or I got a message about someone we loved who was sick, dead, or dying, what would our typical response be? I think for me, most of the time, I would drop everything. I would rush to their side. I would feel the urgency to get there as fast as I could. My question here for you as we get started is, how many of you, maybe as recent as like an hour and a half ago, felt in a rush to just even get here on time? But think about even just the course of your last week, or you might think of your life over the holiday season, how everything feels like a hurry. Like everything is life or death all the time. And yet here we find Jesus in a literal life or death situation. What does he do? Nothing for 2 days. He did nothing for 2 days. This is actually life or death. And yet we get so worked up over, I don't know, whatever we get worked up about, as if it is life or death. And here we saw Jesus take a rest. And it's not because he didn't care, right? It's not like he was just some apathetic dude, right? It says he clearly loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. But you see, the lifestyle of Jesus shows us he wasn't in a rush. He moved at the timing of the Father, not at the timing of human urgency. To mimic the lifestyle of Jesus is to be someone who is not constantly in a rush. Let's note, we see this all throughout the text. He waited 30 years before he started his ministry. On his way to heal Jairus, another life or death situation, he stopped. The crowd was pressing him at all sides. And you know what he does? He took time to talk with the woman who was bleeding. On his way to Jerusalem to fulfill his great, big, gorgeous destiny. This was the culmination of his ministry on earth. What did he do on his way? He stopped, talked to Zacchaeus, had a meal with him. Jesus was rarely in a rush. We want to follow in the footsteps of our rabbi. We got to slow it down. We've got to slow it down. Thomas Merton says it like this. There is a pervasive form of contemporary violence to which the idealist most easily succumbs. Activism and overwork. And he's not talking about like justice activism, he's talking about just being active. Activism and overwork. The rush and pressure of modern life are a form, perhaps the most common form of innate violence. To allow oneself to be carried away by a multitude of conflicting concerns, to surrender to too many demands, to commit one's self to too many projects, to want to help everyone in everything is to succumb to violence. The frenzy of our activism neutralizes our work for peace. It destroys our own inner capacity for peace. It destroys the fruitfulness of our own work because it kills the root of our inner wisdom, which makes work fruitful. I think when we're really honest, when we rush through life, through work, through anything, it does violence. It made me think of just even, I don't know, it was probably 8 years ago. And I had just sold my coffee company that I had spent years building and growing. It had become nationally and globally recognized. And I was sitting there in therapy with my wife, and she looks at me, and to my bewilderment, I wasn't even aware. She goes, "Tyler, you were not there for us. You weren't there for us." It was our first son had been born. You know, I honestly don't remember a lot of my son's first year and a half of life. You see, I was so busy. It wasn't just that I was tired. I had done damage to our marriage. I had done damage to my relationship with my son. It was violent. Do you see what I'm getting at here? You wanna know what's crazy, by the way? You know, when we work a lot, you know what often also suffers? Is our work. It does violence to the work itself. Like when we're well rested, when I go and do my writing, I used to stay up really late to write sermons late at night, but those were my worst ones. It's the ones when I have a nice night of sleep and I wake up and I'm rested, right? The way of Jesus is not rushed. Jesus shows us a different way. He refuses to be overwhelmed by demands, and instead he moves at the pace of love, the pace of presence, the pace of divine timing. So you might ask yourself, put this in your phone, where am I rushed, and how do I change that? Second point from this gorgeous passage, the way of Jesus is present and compassionate in pain and suffering. We're going to jump to John chapter 11, verse 32 through 35. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. You see, Martha runs to him and says, "If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died," which is like kind of a spicy thing to say. Like, come on, dog, like you missed the mark, bro. I don't know about you, but I've wanted to pray that to God numerous times. I think this is a beautiful prayer. And notice how Jesus responded. He wasn't angry at her when she expressed her disappointment in him. Again, that shows us the character of Jesus. He welcomes our questions and our frustrations. But here's what's interesting about this moment, I think. Jesus knew what he was about to do. He had already said it a little bit earlier. He said, this isn't going to end in death. He knew what was going to happen. He knew when all is said and done that everything would be made right. He was aware of that. He also knew how he was going to do it. He was going to be the guy that was going to do it. But notice here that Jesus was not too quick to Jesus juke them, to give them a bunch of spiritual platitudes about how this is all part of God's plan and how it will be okay someday. Jesus didn't immediately just jump to the solutions and say, this is the best way to solve your problem. Instead, what does he do? He said, take me to your place of suffering. Show me where it is. And then what does he do? He cries. This, the shortest verse in the scripture, but perhaps one of the most powerful. It shows us that Jesus doesn't rush past pain. He doesn't just rush into the solution. He enters into the suffering that's right before him. You know, in our communal cultural landscapes with so many TED Talks and self-help books and all things like this, we're so quick to jump to and discuss. So often we argue about what's being done and how to fix a problem. Much of our arguing right now on the internet, when we think bad things about somebody else inside of our heart, it's because we think our way is the best way to come up with a solution. My party can fix this problem, not their party. My president can do this, not their president. I know how to solve the problem. my people, my way. I can solve the problem. This is why they're doing it wrong. But notice what Jesus didn't do. He didn't jump to the solution first. He went directly to the people who were suffering in front of him, and he sat with them. He didn't jump to whose fault it was. He said, this sucks. There's been loss and death. In Jewish culture, when someone dies, there's this ritual called Shiva, where they spend 7 days of mourning. The friends and family come, and they just sit with the person in mourning. No fixing, no cliches, no talking, just weeping. And this is what Jesus does here. He enters Mary and Martha's grief before he tries to fix anything. So what does this look like for us as followers of the Jesus way? When there's a tragedy, before trying to assign blame, maybe you wait a few days and just grieve a loss. This is what Jesus did. When a friend is struggling, instead of trying to give them a quick fix, you can just say, I'm here for you. That sounds really painful. With our kids, so often we're trying to fix their emotions. If they're angry, we try to make them happy. If they're sad, we try to just regulate all their emotions like there's some soundboard. What if we just let them feel what they're feeling for a minute? If they're disappointed, let them be sad. If they're happy, let them be happy. In short, Jesus offered presence, not platitudes. And as followers of Jesus, we are invited to do the same. To enter into people's suffering, to sit with them. And then what's the third thing we see right here in this text is that Jesus wept. Jesus wept. Think about that for a moment here. Jesus, the Son of God, the one who knew he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead, he stopped and he cried. He didn't rush to the miracle. He let himself feel the weight and sorrow of loss and grief. This tells us something crucial about the way of Jesus. That following him isn't about avoiding our emotions. It's about entering into them. We live in a culture that often encourages us to suppress, numb, and bypass our feelings. We say things like, stay strong, don't cry, it's all part of the plan. But Jesus shows us that grief is not a lack of faith. It's a natural, human, God-given response, especially to loss. In fact, I might argue here, it's Christ-like to cry. Yes. How do I know it? Because Christ did it. Therefore, it is Christ-like. It is Christ-like to cry. Jesus, in his humanity, shows us to be human. That's why it's so important that he became a human. He was showing us how to do human things, and one of the human things we do is cry. Right. And it's not just here in this text, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Matthew 26. He was overwhelmed with sorrow and distress before the crucifixion. He prayed, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow. Have you felt that way before? You're being Christ-like. Instead of suppressing his fear, he brought it before God. When he walks up into Jerusalem, this is in Luke 19, he approached the city and he wept, grieving over the people's spiritual blindness and their impending suffering. When Jesus cleared the temple, he expressed a righteous anger. Big emotions that weren't reckless. They were a passionate response to injustice and dishonor to God. On the cross, in his deepest moment of suffering, he cries out, God, why have you forsaken me? He didn't hide his anguish. He voiced it openly, vulnerably, so that humanity for the rest of time could have an example of what it looks like to enter into this. But you know what I love about Jesus' weeping here? Is he didn't just weep for Mary and Martha. He wept with them. He was in the room and wept with them in their suffering. He allowed himself to be fully present in their pain. What this means is we don't have to be afraid of our own sorrow. When we grieve, when we feel lost, when we experience suffering, we are not alone. We follow Christ who knows what it is to weep. He's not scared to enter into our sorrow with us. Point number 4. The way of Jesus walks in trust when others doubt. Doubt surrounded Jesus at every turn in this passage. Before we're kind of like, now we're getting towards like the middle to the end of chapter 11, starting in verse 37. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying? And then Martha's like, dude, like it's going to stink in there. It's been way too long. It's been way too long. What's going to happen? Like, what are you even going to do, Jesus? See, doubt surrounded him at every moment. Before he reached the tomb, they're giving him beef. And what's interesting here is they had seen his power before. They had seen him perform miracles. This reputation had already been cultivated in the life of Jesus. Their faith, you see, they had seen his power before. But now, standing in the presence of death, they assumed it was too late. Jesus had healed the sick, but they'd never seen him raise somebody from the dead. You see, resurrection was beyond their imagination. They hadn't seen it before. So what did they do? They doubted him. You see, when the divine or even other people don't act in the way or the timing that we expect them to, we assume the worst of them, honestly, oftentimes. And then we begin to assign these assumptions to their overall character, right? So they're like, Jesus, you're late. You must not be a good miracle worker anymore. Yep, I've seen it in the past, but there's no way you're going to do it next. And they started to doubt him. And even Martha, again, who had professed her faith in Jesus, she had said in John 11:27 that he was the resurrection and the life. She hesitated when Jesus told them to roll away the stone. Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he has been dead for 4 days. You see, it's one thing to believe in resurrection in theory. It's another thing when we're standing in front of death itself. Yet Jesus, in patience, he didn't rebuke her when she doubted him, right? She was doubting him. The people around, the Jews were doubting him. Instead, you know what he did in her doubt? He didn't let it own him. He invited her to go deeper. Okay, you doubt me? Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? What this means for us, I would suggest, is to walk in faith even when others doubt us. Jesus didn't allow the skepticism or the hesitation of others to deter him. He also didn't let their doubt fester inside his own soul. He didn't make them the enemy. He didn't go to war with them. He didn't argue with them, but he didn't let their doubt just ruin his mission moving forward. He moved forward fully confident in what God was doing. How often have you felt like you have a dream, you have an idea, you have a destiny, but then the doubt and skepticism of other people in your story have dampened your ability to move forward? Most people come into my office with dreams and ideas, and they're not doing it, and they say, Tyler, how can you help me move forward? And I'll start to ask them questions. Why don't you do it? Well, because my mom said I can't. Or this guru on the internet said I don't have the capability. You know, or this is how everybody else did it, and I don't know how to do that, so I just can't do it. We let the doubt of the world around us fester inside. But you know what Jesus did? When he was doubted, he just moved forward. God, I knew what I'm going to do, he says. There will be times when people misunderstand us, when they doubt our calling, they question our choices, or they assume that because we can't see what God is doing in the moment, nothing is happening. Maybe you're trying to heal, grow, or change, but others are trying to define you and who you want to be. It ain't going to work. The Jesus way reminds us that we don't need everyone's approval to walk in obedience to God. Faith means moving forward even when we're being doubted. Sometimes it looks like rolling away the stone before we see the miracle. It means believing that God is still working even when all we can see is loss. It means staying faithful even when others doubt us. Staying rooted in God's timing rather than the pressure and expectations of others. So you might ask very practically, what are the things that are holding me back that are actually coming from the doubt of others, that are contradictory to the promise that God has given me? Our last point here comes in again in John 11, the kind of culmination of the story. We see one of the most profound demonstrations of Jesus' way of living, his response to the death of his dear friend Lazarus. Now, of course, again, he didn't rush in with the solution. He took his time. He grieved. He allowed the grief of those around him to unfold. He trusted in God's perfect timing. He entered into the pain. He didn't try to fix it. He felt it. He stayed present with the people around him. And then when Jesus finally arrives at Lazarus' tomb, he's met with his doubt, both from the crowd and from Martha. But he didn't pull back. He went forward. And then he brought life into death. He brought light into a dark place. Which is to say this, to follow the way of Jesus is to bring light into dark places. How are we bringing light and life into death and darkness? Now, I do believe we have resurrection power in pretty significant ways. But I'm also not unaware that to read this and say, okay, like Jesus raised this guy from the dead. Like not a lot of us like come alongside dead bodies every week. Like raising somebody just out of the tomb probably isn't in our common experience. I've heard some stories, but again, that's just not like I don't know, unless you work a very interesting job, which I'd love to hear about if you do. This just isn't our regular experience, right? So can we follow Jesus in this way? Of course we can. Of course we can. And one of the really unique things that I'd like to point out here in this passage is we always have an opportunity to be part of God's resurrection work in the lives of others. You see, Jesus here, he didn't just perform the miracle and walk away. It wasn't just about him, it was about the people around. He told those around him in verse 44, he told those around him to unbind Lazarus and let him go. He invited other people to be part of the good work. You see, the essence of Jesus, you might not literally know how to raise someone from the dead, but we all can be part of the process of someone's resurrection story. We can all take part in the unraveling. We can all take the part of liberating Lazarus and get him going. In our everyday lives, we're called to walk in trust and faith, not to rush into answers, but lean into the hard spaces. We might not always see a literal miracle, but we can still bring the life of Jesus to dead places, offering hope, encouragement, and grace, even when the path forward is unclear. Just as Jesus used his presence to bring freedom to Lazarus, he calls us all to bring his life into the lives of those around us, helping to unbind others and set them free. This is the Jesus way. We can become so obsessed, addicted to the miracle of the moment, that we miss out on the Jesus way that happens before and after the miracle. The Jesus way is not just about one moment of healing, one moment of salvation, one moment of miracles. The Jesus way does have these things, but they're intertwined with the entirety of a story and of a life. What this passage really is showing us, we love the miracle part. But you know what the miracle involved? Patience, being slow. The whole story is the miracle. The whole story is the miracle. It's the showing up every week to your small group and listening to your friends suffer. It's showing up to therapy, and after maybe you got liberated from an abusive marriage and you're still working on yourself, getting better, and healing and learning to regulate your nervous system. You see, healing happens before the miracle, during the miracle, after the miracle. How do we raise people from the dead? We sit with people in their pain and suffering. We say, sometimes we don't offer platitudes. The way of Jesus, how he raised Lazarus from the dead, had some to do with the miracle, but it also happened to do with his whole lifestyle before, during, and after. Do you see what I'm getting at here? So often we're so upset. I've never seen a miracle. I haven't done big things with God. I haven't done big things for God. My life isn't that interesting. I'm not on a stage, or I don't have a podcast. I haven't written a book. And it's like, dog, have you taken a day off? Have you ever even just lived slowly for 10 minutes? Right? Have you ever just gone off to the hill and prayed and just did the Jesus way for a little while? Could it be that the Jesus way leads to the Jesus life? So you're longing for these liberations. It starts with the lifestyle. Of course you're not seeing miracles. You're not doing the things Jesus did. it all adds up. It's all part of the same soup. We rest. We go slow. We listen to people suffer. We take the side of the marginalized, not the powerful. Yep. These are things Jesus did. That's right. He doesn't get obsessed with the people in charge. He goes to the person at the bottom, the person suffering the most. Yep. These are the things of the Jesus way. So my friends, may you find passages like Luke 11 and pay close attention to how Jesus lived, so that you may be covered in the dust of your rabbi.